The Galactic Council had existed for over 10,000 years, bringing together hundreds of alien civilizations under one banner of cooperation and mutual protection. In all that time, they had seen countless species rise and fall, each bringing their own unique gifts to the grand tapestry of galactic society. Some species were master engineers, capable of building structures that defied the laws of physics. Others were brilliant diplomats who could negotiate peace between ancient enemies. A few were warriors, born and bred for combat across generations of selective evolution. And then there were the humans. When humanity stumbled onto the galactic stage 30 years ago, they were greeted with polite curiosity and mild amusement. Here was a species that had barely escaped their own solar system, their primitive chemical rockets sputtering along at speeds that made elder races chuckle into their various appendages. They had no natural advantages that made them stand out. They weren't particularly strong or fast. Their lifespans were embarrassingly short compared to most council members. Their technology was thousands of years behind the galactic standard. But humans were eager learners and surprisingly good at commerce. They traded their art, their music, their strange earth foods that some aliens found deliciously exotic. Human merchants became a common sight in council ports, always smiling, always friendly, always ready to make a deal that benefited everyone involved. Human diplomats sat in council chambers, taking careful notes and asking thoughtful questions. They seemed genuinely happy just to be part of the larger galactic community. The Council, in their infinite wisdom and perhaps a touch of condescension, decided that humanity would serve perfectly as a support species. Not warriors, not leaders, but useful contributors to galactic civilization. Humans seemed content with this role. They built trade stations, established peaceful colonies, and never once raised their voice in council debates about military matters. When wars broke out between other species, humans offered medical aid and humanitarian support, but never soldiers. So when the Zithran Dominion came roaring out of the outer reaches like a storm of fire and death, no one expected humanity to do anything but hide behind the Council's established military powers. The Zithrans were everything humans were not. They were a warrior culture that had evolved on a high-gravity death world where only the strongest survived to reproduce. Each Zithran soldier stood 8 feet tall, with natural armor plating and reflexes that could snatch bullets from the air. They lived for conquest and glory in battle. For 2 brutal years, the Zithrans had torn to the outer reaches like a wildfire consuming dry grass. 40 star systems had fallen to their endless fleets. Billions of civilians had been displaced or enslaved. The Zithran philosophy was simple and terrifying. Conquer or be conquered. Mercy was weakness. Diplomacy was for cowards. Only strength mattered. The Council assembled their defensive fleets, calling upon their traditional military powers. The Krellians sent their heavy dreadnoughts. The Vex contributed their carrier groups. The Thornback Collective deployed their quantum missile platforms. It was an impressive display of galactic military might, representing dozens of species and thousands of years of combined military doctrine. But they needed a commander, someone to coordinate this massive defensive force. The debate in the council chambers lasted 3 days. Every major military power wanted command. The Krellians argued their experience. The Vex claimed their superior tactical computers. The Thornbacks insisted their hive mind coordination made them ideal. The arguing grew heated. Time was running out, and the Zithrans were advancing toward more populated systems with each passing day. That's when Ambassador Rebecca Morrison stood up from a human delegation seat and spoke the words that would change galactic history forever. "We'll do it," she said simply. "Humanity will take command of the defensive fleet." The council chamber fell absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop across the vast space. Hundreds of alien eyes turned to stare at the human ambassador. Some council members thought they had misheard. Others assumed it was some kind of joke. The Krellian ambassador actually laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed off the crystal walls. But Rebecca Morrison wasn't laughing. She stood there in her simple Earth uniform, hands clasped behind her back, meeting the gaze of beings who had mastered warfare before humanity had discovered fire. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something that made the older, wiser council members feel suddenly uneasy. There was a confidence there that didn't match humanity's reputation. "You must be joking," the Krellian ambassador said, still chuckling. "No offense intended, Ambassador Morrison, but your species has never shown any military capability whatsoever. You've been part of the Council for 3 decades and haven't so much as built a proper warship." Rebecca smiled. It was a small smile, polite and professional, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We accept full command of the defensive operation. We'll coordinate with all participating species, but tactical decisions will be made by human officers. If the Council agrees, we can have our fleet in position within 48 hours. The Council members looked at each other, confused and concerned. The Zithrans were days away from the Keeper's Gate system, a critical junction point that, if lost, would open up the core worlds to invasion. They needed a commander now, and the major military powers were still arguing among themselves. Perhaps letting humanity try wasn't the worst idea. At least they seemed willing to work together with everyone. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? If the humans failed, the Council could always take back command and blame the defeat on humanity's inexperience. It was almost perfect from a political standpoint. The vote was called. To everyone's surprise, it passed. Humanity would lead the defense of the Keeper's Gate system. News of the Council's decision spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Most species reacted with confusion or concern. The Zithrans, when they heard, reacted with explosive laughter. Their war prime, the supreme military commander of their forces, gave a statement that was broadcast across all channels. "The Council sends merchants to fight warriors? Perfect. We will crush them quickly and add humanity's homeworld to our growing empire. Let this be a lesson to all species who forget that weakness invites destruction." Admiral James Parker stood on the bridge of the UHSF Indomitable, a vessel that the Galactic Council had never seen before. His hands rested calmly on the command console as he watched the tactical display show 3,000 Zithran warships entering the Keeper's Gate system. Behind him, his bridge crew moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that only comes from years of intensive training. No one spoke unless necessary. Every officer knew their role perfectly. The tension in the air was thick, but not from fear. It was anticipation. Parker was 53 years old and had spent 35 of those years in the United Human Space Force. He had trained for this moment his entire adult life, running simulations of alien contact scenarios thousands of times. He had studied every known military conflict in human history, from ancient sword battles to nuclear standoffs. He knew tactics that had been developed and refined over 10,000 years of human warfare. And now, finally, he would put that knowledge to use. "Status report," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "All ships in position, sir," replied Commander Lisa Hayes from the tactical station. 200 vessels holding formation. Enemy fleet advancing at 0.7 light speed. They'll be in weapons range in 90 seconds. "Good," Parker said. He took a slow breath and looked around at his crew. These weren't the humans the galaxy knew. Every person on this bridge had been training in secret military facilities since they were teenagers. They had undergone genetic modifications that enhanced their reaction times and stress tolerance. They could process information faster than any other known species. They could survive acceleration forces that would turn most aliens into puddles. Parker reached forward and entered a command sequence that he had memorized decades ago but never used. "All ships," he said, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. "Disengage limiters. Authorization, Prometheus 77 Alpha." Throughout the human fleet, something extraordinary began to happen. The reactors that had been quietly humming along at 15% capacity suddenly roared to life. Energy readings spiked so dramatically that the Galactic Council observers monitoring the battle thought their instruments were malfunctioning. The human ships, which had looked like simple commercial vessels with basic defensive capabilities, began to transform. Hull panels slid away, revealing weapon systems that shouldn't have been possible. Railgun batteries emerged from hidden compartments. Missile tubes cycled open. Point defense systems activated. Energy shields that operated on principles the Council didn't even understand flickered into existence around each ship. The reactor signatures alone were off the charts, producing more power than some alien capital ships 3 times their size. On the Zithran flagship, the war commander stared at his tactical display in confusion. What are those readings? Are the humans experiencing reactor failures? Negative, Commander, his sensor officer replied, his voice uncertain. Those readings are accurate. Their power output just increased by over 800% across their entire fleet. The war commander laughed. Impossible. No species can hide that much capability. Their ships must be overloading. Press the attack. We'll crush them before they explode themselves. The first wave of Zithran warships, 300 of their fastest cruisers, accelerated toward the human formation. These ships had destroyed entire planetary defense networks. Their commanders were confident, almost bored. This would be over quickly, and they could return to the real battle against the Council's main military forces. What happened next took exactly 17 seconds. The human fleet didn't move. They simply floated there in space, waiting. The Zithran ships closed the weapons range and prepared to fire, and then every human ship opened up simultaneously. The railguns fired first. These weren't the primitive kinetic weapons the Zithrans had read about in human technical specifications. These were weapons that accelerated tungsten projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. The rounds hit with the force of nuclear explosions, but they were solid matter, not energy. Zithran shields, designed to disperse energy beams and plasma weapons, did absolutely nothing against them. The projectiles punched through shields like they weren't even there and tore into hull armor. The missiles came next. The Zithrans had expected simple chemical rockets, easy to shoot down or jam. Instead, they faced something terrifying. Each missile was guided by an artificial intelligence that had been trained on millions of combat scenarios. These weren't dumb weapons you could fool with decoys or electronic countermeasures. They learned and adapted in real time. When the Zithrans tried to jam their guidance systems, the missiles switched to optical tracking. When they deployed chaff clouds, the missiles navigated through them using predictive algorithms. When they tried to shoot them down with point defense, the missiles worked together, sacrificing some of themselves to create openings for others. The Zithran first wave didn't just lose. It ceased to exist. 300 warships that had terrorized the outer reaches for 2 years were reduced to expanding clouds of debris in less time than it takes to tie your shoes. The war commander on the flagship watched his tactical display in stunned silence as 300 friendly icons simply vanished. "What just happened?" he whispered. But the surprises weren't over. The human ships began to move, and they moved in ways that should have been impossible. Zithran dreadnoughts were tough and powerful, but they were also slow, limited by the fact that their crews couldn't survive more than 5 or 6 G-forces of acceleration. The human destroyers, smaller ships that should have been even more limited, suddenly pulled turns at 30 times the force of gravity. Inside those ships, the human crews weren't being crushed into pace because they weren't sitting in chairs like traditional spaceship crews. They floated in specialized gel suspension systems that distributed acceleration forces evenly across their entire bodies. Their genetic enhancements allowed them to stay conscious and functional under stresses that would kill unmodified humans. They could think, react, and fight while experiencing forces that would liquefy most organic life. The human ships danced through space like fighters, not warships. They spun and twisted, always keeping their weapons pointed at enemy vessels while making themselves almost impossible to hit. Zithran gunners, among the best in the galaxy, found themselves firing at positions where human ships had been seconds ago, never where they were now. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Parker watched the battle unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone who had planned for this exact scenario. All ships execute pattern Delta 7. Focus fire on their command vessels. Let's cut the head off the snake. The truth was becoming clear to everyone watching. The humans the galaxy had known for 30 years were all civilians. Every merchant, every diplomat, every colonist had been exactly what they appeared to be, peaceful people trying to build a life among the stars. But they had never been the only humans. Earth's actual military had stayed home, training in the dark, preparing for the day when humanity might need to defend itself or its allies. They had built weapons in secret. They had developed tactics in isolation. They had turned themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that understood war so completely, so thoroughly, that they could hide their true nature for decades. The Zithrans were learning a hard lesson. They had mistaken humanity's choice for peace as inability to wage war. They were very, very wrong. In the Council Observation Chamber, representatives from 40 different species watched the battle unfold on massive holographic displays. What they were seeing didn't make sense according to everything they knew about warfare. The humans weren't just fighting well. They were fighting perfectly. It was like watching a master chess player compete against someone who had just learned the rules yesterday. The Krellian military observer, General Thorne, leaned forward in his seat, his 6 eyes narrowed in concentration. He had fought in 17 major conflicts across his 200-year lifespan. He had written 3 books on military strategy that were taught in war colleges across the galaxy, and he was watching something that made him question everything he thought he knew about combat. "They're not reacting to Zithran moves," he muttered to himself. "They're predicting them. How is that possible?" Ambassador Morrison, who stood at the back of the chamber, allowed herself a small smile. "We call it Strategic Defense Protocol Omega, General. It's not one battle plan. It's a comprehensive military doctrine developed over 3 centuries of theoretical study." The truth was even more impressive than that. When humanity had first achieved spaceflight, they had immediately begun thinking about the possibility of alien contact. And being human, they had immediately begun thinking about what would happen if those aliens were hostile. Military think tanks on Earth had spent 300 years studying every war humanity had ever fought, every tactic ever employed, every strategy ever conceived. They had used supercomputers to run billions of combat simulations against theoretical alien opponents with different capabilities, technologies, and tactical doctrines. The result was Protocol Omega, a military framework so comprehensive that it had contingencies for scenarios that hadn't even happened yet. For every possible enemy tactic, human strategists had developed multiple counters. For every weapon system they could imagine, they had designed 5 different countermeasures. They had studied warfare so intensely, so completely, that they could predict enemy behavior with frightening accuracy. And now the Zithrans were learning what it meant to fight an enemy who had done their homework. Commander Rachel Bennett sat in the cockpit of her strike carrier, the UHSF Thunderbolt, watching her tactical display with the cool focus of a predator tracking prey. She was 38 years old, and she had been flying combat simulations since she was 16. She had logged over 10,000 hours in virtual combat against every type of enemy the human military could dream up. Her neural implants gave her reaction times measured in milliseconds. Her enhanced vision could track multiple targets simultaneously. And right now, she was about to show the galaxy what human fighter doctrine looked like. "Strike Group Theta, this is Bennett," she said into the comm system. "Execute Hammerfall on my mark. Remember your training. Fast, precise, lethal. Don't give them time to react." Behind her carrier, 2 more identical vessels moved into position. Each carrier held 36 fighter craft, small single-pilot ships that were barely larger than a civilian shuttle. The Galactic Council had seen these fighters during routine exercises and had dismissed them as toys. They looked fragile, undergunned, and slow compared to heavy attack ships other species used. That assessment was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. "Mark," Bennett said calmly. All 3 carriers opened their launch bays simultaneously, and 108 human fighters exploded into space. They didn't accelerate gradually like normal ships. They launched like bullets from a gun, going from 0 to combat speed in under 2 seconds. The acceleration was so intense that it would have killed any unmodified pilot instantly. But these weren't normal pilots. These were the Valkyries, humanity's elite fighter corps, men and women who had been selected for their exceptional reflexes, and then enhanced further with genetic modifications and neural implants. On Zithran sensors, the fighters appeared as streaks of light, moving so fast that tracking computers struggled to maintain locks. The Zithran point defense systems, which had successfully defended against millions of conventional missiles, opened fire. They might as well have been trying to swat flies with sledgehammers. The human fighters jinked and weaved, performing maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They spun, rolled, and twisted through defensive fire like dancers performing a deadly ballet. And then they were through the defensive screen and among the Zithran capital ships. What followed was carnage. Each fighter was small and fast, but that didn't mean it was weak. They carried weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in capital ship designs. Torpedoes that burrowed into engine sections. Missiles that targeted life support systems. Railgun rounds that punched through armor at weak points where hull plates connected. The fighters swarmed over Zithran dreadnoughts like angry wasps, striking from every angle, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. In the council chamber, the alien observers sat in stunned silence. Fighter craft weren't supposed to be this effective against capital ships. It violated every principle of space combat doctrine. Capital ships had thick armor, powerful shields, and extensive point defense systems specifically designed to swat down small attack craft. But the human fighters were making a mockery of those defenses. "This is impossible," the Vex military coordinator said, its synthetic voice tinged with something that might have been fear. "Our tactical models predict that fighter craft should be destroyed within the first 30 seconds of engaging capital ships. Those human pilots have been in combat for over 3 minutes and have only lost 2 fighters. Your tactical models are based on conventional thinking," Ambassador Morrison replied. "Humans don't think conventionally when it comes to warfare." Back at the main battle, the Zithrans were growing desperate. Their war commander, facing losses that were becoming catastrophic, made a decision. He would employ the crushing star formation, a tactic that had won the Zithrans dozens of battles. The concept was simple but brutal. Concentrate your entire fleet on a single point, overwhelming any defense through sheer volume of firepower. Nothing could stand against that much concentrated destruction. "All ships, form up on my position," the war commander ordered. "We execute Crushing Star. Concentrate all fire on the human flagship. We'll vaporize their command structure and watch their fleet fall apart." The Zithran fleet began to converge. 3,000 ships moving toward a single point in space. Their weapons charged. Their crews prepared for the devastating Alpha Strike that would end this battle. The war commander watched his display with grim satisfaction. The humans might be good, but nobody could survive Crushing Star. On the Indomitable, Admiral Parker watched the Zithran formation shift and actually smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of someone who had just watched their opponent make exactly the mistake they'd been hoping for. "They're doing Crushing Star," Commander Hayes reported from Tactical. "Of course they are," Parker replied. "It's what aggressive warrior cultures always do when they're losing. They concentrate force and try to overwhelm through sheer firepower. It worked against species who panicked and froze when faced with that much incoming fire." He paused, then keyed the fleet-wide comm. "All ships, execute response pattern Delta 9. Disperse and destroy." The human fleet, which had been fighting in a relatively compact formation, suddenly scattered like a school of fish evading a predator. But this wasn't panic retreat. This was a precisely choreographed maneuver that had been practiced thousands of times. The 200 human ships spread out in a 3-dimensional sphere around a condensing Zithran formation, each ship taking up a pre-calculated position. The Zithrans suddenly found themselves with no central target to shoot at. Their concentrated firepower, designed to overwhelm a single point, was now uselessly dispersed across empty space. And they were packed so tightly together that they couldn't maneuver effectively. "All ships, fire at will," Parker said calmly. 200 human warships opened fire simultaneously from 40 different vectors. The Zithran fleet, compressed into a small volume of space, had nowhere to dodge. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Railgun rounds tore through multiple ships at once. Missiles found easy targets. Energy weapons carved through hulls. The Crushing Star formation, the Zithran signature move, their unbeatable tactic, had become a death trap, and the humans had turned it against them with surgical precision. The battle was over in 4 hours. What remained of the Zithran fleet was retreating in complete disarray, leaving behind the wreckage of over 2,000 warships. The human defensive fleet had lost exactly 12 vessels. It wasn't a victory. It was a complete and total demolition. And the Galactic Council wanted answers immediately. The emergency session was called within an hour of the ceasefire. Every council member was present, either physically or through holographic projection. The chamber buzzed with confused and frightened conversations. Species that had considered themselves the galaxy's military powers were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew. Ambassador Morrison stood quietly at the human delegation pod, waiting. She knew what was coming. The council speaker, an ancient being from a species that had been part of the council for 6,000 years, raised its primary appendage for silence. We demand an explanation from humanity. You have hidden military capabilities that far exceed anything we imagined. You have deceived this council for 3 decades. Explain yourselves. Morrison nodded slowly. Members of the council, I'm connecting you now to Earth High Command. General Michael Stone will answer your questions directly. The main holographic display shifted, and a human male appeared. He was in his late 60s, his face lined with deep creases that spoke of decades carrying heavy burdens. His hair was iron gray, cut in a military style. His uniform was simple and practical, with no decorations or medals visible. But his eyes were what caught everyone's attention. They were tired eyes, old eyes that had seen things that left permanent marks on the soul. General Stone stood in what appeared to be a simple office on Earth. Behind him, through a window, the council members could see blue skies and green trees, a stark contrast to the cold void of space where the battle had just occurred. He looked directly into the camera, meeting the gaze of hundreds of alien representatives across light years of distance. Members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice rough like gravel. You want to know why we hid what we were capable of. The answer is simple, though you might not like it. We hid our military strength because we were terrified of what we might become if we didn't. He paused, letting that sink in. Several council members started to speak, but Stone raised a hand. Please, let me finish. You need to understand what humanity is, what we've been, to understand why we made the choices we did. The display behind Stone changed, showing images from Earth's history. Ancient battles with swords and spears. Medieval sieges with castles burning. Trenches from global wars where millions died in mud and blood. Cities vaporized by atomic weapons. The images kept coming, an endless parade of human violence spanning thousands of years. We've been killing each other since before we discovered fire, Stone said quietly. For 10,000 years of recorded history, warfare has been our constant companion. We fought over territory, resources, religion, ideology, and sometimes just because we were angry. We developed thousands of different ways to kill our fellow humans more efficiently. The images shifted to show weapons. Stone Age clubs and spears. Bronze swords. Steel armor. Gunpowder cannons. Machine guns. Tanks. Fighter jets. Ballistic missiles. Each more deadly than the last. Each representing another step in humanity's long journey of learning how to destroy itself more effectively. We've committed genocide against our own subspecies, Stone continued, his voice heavy with shame. Neanderthals, Denisovans, others whose names are lost to history. We didn't just compete with them. We exterminated them. And that was before we even invented agriculture. The council chamber was silent. Some members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. As we developed more advanced technology, our capacity for destruction grew exponentially, Stone went on. In the 20th century alone, we fought 2 global wars that killed over 100 million people. We invented nuclear weapons and came within minutes of using them to destroy our entire civilization. Not once, but multiple times. New images appeared. Mushroom clouds rising over cities. Underground bunkers built to survive nuclear war. Charts showing how close humanity had come to extinction during various crisis points. The numbers were staggering. During one incident in 1983, a single human in a missile facility had stopped a nuclear launch based on nothing but gut instinct. One person, one decision, had stood between humanity and potential extinction. We've developed 6 different ways to completely extinct ourselves, Stone said, his voice cracking slightly. Nuclear war, biological weapons, artificial intelligence gone wrong, nanotechnology disasters, climate collapse, and genetic engineering accidents. We came terrifyingly close to using all of them at various points. We stood on the edge of the abyss and stared into it. He paused again, taking a slow breath. When he continued, his voice was steadier but filled with something the council members couldn't quite identify. Regret? Fear? Determination? So when we finally made it to the stars and discovered we weren't alone, we had a choice to make. We could be the warriors we'd always been, or we could try to be something different. We chose different. We decided that the humans who went to the stars would be our best selves. Our artists, our scientists, our diplomats, our merchants, people who built things instead of breaking them, people who made peace instead of war. The images behind Stone shifted to show the humans the galaxy had met. Smiling merchants in busy spaceports, scientists collaborating with alien researchers, diplomats negotiating trade agreements, colonists building farms on new worlds. These were the humans the council knew. Friendly, peaceful, eager to learn and trade. For 30 years we succeeded, Stone said, and now there was pride in his voice. Our civilians showed the galaxy that humans could be partners, friends, contributors to galactic civilization. They proved that we were more than just our violent history, and that meant everything to us. He leaned forward, his expression intense. But we never forgot what we were. We couldn't afford to, because the universe doesn't care about your good intentions. It doesn't reward peaceful species with safety. So while our civilians built a new human culture among the stars, our military stayed home and prepared. New images appeared. Secret military installations deep underground. Shipyards in the dark spaces between stars. Training facilities where soldiers practiced for threats they'd never encountered. Research labs developing weapons and tactics against theoretical alien enemies. Every human civilian ship carries encrypted military protocols in its computers, Stone explained. If Earth were ever attacked, those protocols would activate, turning merchant vessels into armed defenders. Every human colony has hidden armories in its foundations, enough weapons to equip every adult if necessary. Every human child learns about peace and cooperation, but every human adult knows where the weapons are and how to use them. He stood up straighter, his military bearing evident. We didn't hide our capabilities out of deception, council members. We hid them out of fear. Fear that the galaxy saw us as warriors first. That's all we would ever be. Fear that we'd fall back into our old patterns of solving every problem with violence. Fear that we become the monsters we'd worked so hard to leave behind. The council chamber remained silent. The weight of Stone's words hung in the air like a physical presence. But the Zithrans left us no choice, Stone continued, his voice hardening. They threatened innocent species. They slaughtered billions. And when you asked for help, we couldn't refuse. Because that's the other thing about humans. We're not just good at warfare. We're good at protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's in our nature, the same as our capacity for violence. He looked directly into the camera, his tired eyes meeting the gaze of every council member. So yes, we hid our military strength. And we'd do it again if we had to, because being strong doesn't mean you should act strong. It means you should protect the weak, not exploit them. The war didn't end with one battle. But after the disaster at Keeper's Gate, the Zithran Dominion's aura of invincibility was shattered. Word spread quickly through the outer reaches about what had happened. The unstoppable warriors who had conquered 40 systems in 2 years had been completely destroyed by a species everyone thought was weak. The psychological impact was devastating. Over the next 3 months, human fleets systematically liberated every system the Zithrans had conquered. They didn't do it alone. The Galactic Council's military forces fought alongside them, but now with human commanders coordinating every operation. And it was like watching a masterclass in warfare. The humans fought with precision and efficiency that made seasoned alien veterans feel like amateurs. They used tactics that seemed to come from nowhere, feints within feints, ambushes that turned into traps for counter-ambushers, psychological warfare that broke enemy morale before shots were even fired. Every battle was different, but every battle ended the same way, with Zithran forces retreating or surrendering. The Zithran home system fell without a single shot being fired. Admiral Parker's fleet simply appeared in orbit, and the War Prime knew it was over. There would be no glorious last stand. No suicide charge, just the cold reality that they had picked a fight with the wrong species. Now Admiral Parker sat in a small, sterile meeting room aboard a neutral space station. The room was deliberately simple. Just a table, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No weapons, no guards, no witnesses except for a single recording device. Across from him sat the War Prime, the supreme military leader of the Zithran Dominion. The War Prime was an impressive sight even in defeat. He stood 8 feet tall, his natural armor plate scarred from decades of combat. His 3 eyes glowed with a dull amber light. He had personally killed over 1,000 enemies in battle across his lifetime. He was bred for war, trained for war, lived for war, and he had just been beaten by a species he'd laughed at 3 months ago. "I expected demands," the War Prime said, his voice a deep rumble that humans could feel in their chests. "Territory. Resources. Perhaps you would claim our homeworld as a trophy." Parker shook his head slowly. "We don't want your territory. We don't want tribute. We don't want to rule over you or humiliate you." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "We want you to stop. That's all. Stop conquering. Stop killing. Stop treating the galaxy like it exists for your glory." The War Prime's eyes narrowed. "That is all? You fight a war, destroy our fleets, occupy our worlds, and you want nothing in return? I do not understand." "I know you don't," Parker replied. "That's part of the problem. You think warfare is about domination, about proving strength, about taking what you want from the weak. But that's not why we fight. We fight to protect people who can't protect themselves. And when the fight is over, we stop." The War Prime was silent for a long moment, studying the human across from him. Parker met his gaze without flinching, without aggression, but without backing down either. Finally, the War Prime spoke again. "What you showed us in battle, that was not your full strength, was it?" Parker's expression didn't change. "No. What you saw was our defensive fleet. Ships designed to protect Council space and respond to threats. You haven't seen our assault carriers, our siege platforms, or our planet crackers." He paused, letting that sink in. "And I pray to whatever god you worship that you never do." "Planet crackers," the War Prime repeated slowly. "Weapons that can destroy worlds. Weapons we built 200 years ago and hoped we'd never need," Parker confirmed. "We have the capability to sterilize entire planets, to crack them open like eggs, to turn your home world into an asteroid field. We've had that capability for generations, and we've never used it. Not once, not even against you, when we easily could have." The War Prime sat back in his chair. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he'd rarely experienced: genuine fear. Not fear of death in battle. That was acceptable, even honorable. This was fear of something much worse. Fear of total annihilation. Fear of a species that could destroy worlds but chose not to. "You are apex predators pretending to be prey," he said slowly, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and horror. "Why? What purpose does such deception serve?" Parker was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because being the strongest doesn't mean you should act like it. Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who aren't as strong. It's about choosing restraint when you could choose violence. It's about being feared and choosing instead to be trusted." He stood up, looking down at the War Prime. "You built a culture around conquest because you could. You had the strength, so you used it. You thought that made you powerful. But real power is having the ability to destroy and choosing not to. That's what you never understood. That's what we hope you learn." Parker moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "The Council will be lenient in the peace terms. You'll keep your homeworld and your core systems. You'll pay reparations, but nothing that will cripple your economy. In 50 years, maybe less, you'll be welcomed back as full members of the galactic community. But only if you change. Only if you learn that strength without wisdom is just brutality." The War Prime watched him go, his mind reeling with implications he was only beginning to understand. Back at the Galactic Council, an emergency session was convened. Every member species was present. The chamber was packed with representatives who had spent 3 months watching humanity rewrite everything they thought they knew about warfare. Ambassador Morrison stood at the center of the chamber, just as she had 3 months ago. But everything had changed. The council speaker addressed her, its voice carrying across the vast space. Ambassador Morrison, the council must know. What are humanity's intentions now? You have proven yourselves to be the most formidable military power in known space. What do you want? Morrison smiled, and this time was genuine, reaching her eyes. What do we want? We want to go back to being merchants and diplomats. We want to help rebuild the systems damaged by this war. We want to share some of our defensive technology so other species can better protect themselves. And we want to continue learning from all of you. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber. The Krellian representative stood. You don't want a seat on the council's military directorate? You don't want control over strategic systems? You don't want tribute from the Zitherans? No, Morrison said simply. We never wanted any of that. We wanted to stop a threat to innocent people. We've done that. Now we go back to our lives. The Vex coordinator's synthetic voice cut through the murmurs. What if another threat emerges? What if another aggressive species attacks council space? Morrison's smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression that made several council members shift uncomfortably. Then we'll deal with it, just like we dealt with the Zitherans. But we hope it doesn't come to that. Because, counselors, what you witnessed over the past 3 months was humans defending others. You still haven't seen what we look like when someone threatens Earth directly. And I hope, for everyone's sake, that you never do. The chamber fell silent. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Every council member understood the implication. Humanity had revealed incredible military capability while fighting a defensive war in someone else's territory. What would they be capable of if they were actually fighting for their own survival? Over the following weeks and months, a new understanding settled over the galaxy. Humanity wasn't the minor species anymore. They weren't the helpful merchants or the friendly diplomats. Well, they were still those things, but everyone now knew what lay beneath that peaceful exterior. They were the sleeping giant, the hidden guardian, the species that had mastered warfare so completely that they could choose peace. Human merchants still traveled the trade routes, but other species treated them with new respect. Human diplomats still negotiated agreements, but their words carried new weight. Human colonies still grew and prospered, but everyone now knew those peaceful farmers and scientists had weapons hidden in their basements. The phrase entered common galactic usage, "Don't wake the humans." It became shorthand for a simple truth. There was a species out there that would rather be underestimated than feared, that chose peace over war even when they could dominate through violence, that protected the weak because it was the right thing to do, not because there was anything to gain from it. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had revealed their true military power, and in doing so, had revealed something even more important: their true character. They were warriors who chose to be peacemakers, predators who protected prey, the strongest species in known space who used that strength to defend others rather than dominate them. And across 1,000 worlds, beings of every species breathed easier knowing that when darkness came, when threats emerged, when the innocent needed protection, the humans would be there. Not because they had to be, but because that's who they chose to be. The Galactic Council had made a mistake 3 months ago when they underestimated humanity. But it turned out to be the best mistake they ever made. Because in forcing humans to reveal what they truly were, they had found not a conqueror, but a protector. Not a tyrant, but a guardian. Not a monster, but a friend who just happened to be the scariest thing in the galaxy when you threatened their friends. And that made all the difference.